growth forecast for the entire region for this year is for real GDP to contract by 3.8%. That's for the region as a whole. When we say Southeast Asia, we also include East Timor or Timor-Leste in our group, along with the 10 ASEAN countries. The worst hit or the hardest hit countries are Thailand, the Philippines, Timor-Leste, and Singapore. These are the four that kind of, if you rank order them, these will be contracting by more than 5% in each case in 2020. And then you've got the countries that have, done reasonably well, both on the health, the pandemic front, somewhat on the economic front. Vietnam comes to mind. Here our forecast is probably the highest in the region. Just to confirm, let me look at that. It's 4.1 that we predicted in June, but that we downgraded it to 1.8%. Now this would be among the highest that you're seeing in the region. So that gives you, in a nutshell, the challenge that we are facing. And this, in comparison to 2019, we had Southeast Asia growing at 4.4% as a region, whereas now it's negative 3.8%. 2021, like some of the others, we are optimistic. For the region as a whole, we are projecting 5.5% in our latest update. You asked about what are the risks to these projections. You've got on the health side, you've got on economics, and you've got country and region-specific issues, as well as I do want to, particularly for Southeast Asia, mention natural disasters, which certainly in the case of Indonesia, Philippines, in fact, as we speak, today we are going through a typhoon. Vietnam, as you know, recently faced major devastating floods. Other countries such as Cambodia, Myanmar, for instance, they also have their seasonal floods. So these natural disasters could be dampeners. Now, just to go through a few points in terms of, if you look at health, I mentioned earlier vaccine availability. This is very critical. It's availability, delivery, and also dealing with issues such as vaccine hesitancy. Our growth forecasts are based on the assumption that by about June, July, at least the frontline health workers and the others who are vulnerable will be protected through vaccination program that countries are putting in place. On the economic side, we've got a few factors in terms of downside risks that we do need to look at. There is global trade, needless to say, has declined. Many countries in Southeast Asia have all been highly dependent on trade. Regional value chains have been very strong. Now, as countries go through the post-COVID phase, they have to certainly rebuild those regional value chains. Tourism revival, which from a foreign currency flow point of view, is there going to be movement of people? Clearly, in order to deal with the pandemic and the economic crisis, countries have had to borrow from either global debt markets or externally through official development assistance. Public debt will be increasing, so countries do need to look at and ensure that public debt would be sustainable. Number one, I would say learning from the pandemic in terms of how to position themselves. The so-called balance between flattening the pandemic curve and flattening the recession curve. We believe in those 2 months, countries have certainly picked up valuable lessons which they can use moving forward. Now, for instance, dealing with the second wave of the pandemic, we are seeing that countries have positioned themselves quite well. A couple of other things that come to mind is how do countries treat the economic crisis as an opportunity for economic transformation? There, I would say almost every country is very keen. They are focusing quite a lot. Here, I would borrow what Professor Raghuram Rajan, the former chief economist of the World Bank, of the International Monetary Fund, who participated in a high-level panel that ADB hosted, he referred to as the 3R framework. The first R is repair, second R is recover, third R is reform. What we are doing is working with the countries, helping them develop forward-looking action plans, looking at key segments of the economy. First and foremost, social protection. That is going to be quite critical. Second, on the economic front, the support that has been given for small and medium enterprises to function. So far, what we are seeing is that most economies are functioning at about between 60 to 70%. So that's about 30 to 40% of economies not functioning. So they are looking at how can they revive back those small and medium enterprises. The third part of this is on what new opportunities are going to be there. And here, in the early days, maybe in the first 2 months of the crisis, there was a thought that the focus on big data and digitization may all be hyped up. But I think now clearly there is recognition that countries do need to invest in that big data. Fourth area where countries are focusing on, now there is recognition that this crisis should not lead to an infrastructure crisis. So there is now focus, there is thinking. In the Philippines, for example, the government has been focused on its build infrastructure acceleration program. Indonesia likewise is looking at how infrastructure spending can be kept and increased in 2021 and beyond, and many other countries, including Vietnam, Cambodia. And finally, last point I had mentioned, Richard, is clearly countries, I mentioned revenue compression. Countries are going through fiscal consolidation process, and there has been strong cooperation that has emerged, coordination that has emerged between fiscal and monetary fronts of the economies. Now, what countries need to look at moving forward is to enhance efforts for domestic revenue mobilization or domestic resource mobilization broadly. There are many countries in ASEAN, if you compare them with OECD countries, their tax revenue to GDP ratio is quite low, in the low tens, say around 12%, 13% or so. Clearly, in order to strengthen the economies and to be ready for future crises, they do need to put in place measures to increase domestic resources and domestic revenue. For Southeast Asia, our estimate is that climate resilient infrastructure needs would be about $210 billion per year until 2030. Now, even before the pandemic, the region did have a fairly large gap on this front of about 60% of the investments needed per year. So if you're looking at 210, so about roughly $130 billion of gap, let us say. And this translates to about 4% of GDP. And then this again, I want to reiterate, taking climate change into account. Clearly, the focus is there in the countries to make the recovery a green recovery. But is it as strong as in other parts of the world? The answer is not yet. For example, Europe has got the Green Deal. Does Asia, does Southeast Asia have it? Not yet. But we do believe that the right ingredients are there in place. I'll mention a couple of things. This is at the regional level as well as at the national level, what countries can do. At the regional level, ADB helped set up the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund in 2011. I already mentioned the two examples of the bond issuance. So clearly, capital markets need to be tapped a lot more than what the region has been able to do so far. Here, the green bond standards that ADB helped develop and the ASEAN region to adopt will come in quite handy. Making infrastructure projects bankable in itself is a significant challenge to attract private sector investments to come in. Green projects, inherently, they could be more risky in many countries. So a lot of structuring needs to be done. So we have project development assistance that is available for countries in the region. We have at the corporate level in ADB, the Asia Pacific Project Preparation Facility that helps structure projects. And we are working in particularly targeting green recovery type of projects. At the national levels, countries have set up their own project development facilities as well. Renewable energy transition is going to be certainly boosted by the COVID pandemic. In April this year, based on work that we had done with Indonesia, for instance, over the last 2 years, we had a large geothermal energy project that was approved. And that we hope would be unleashing similar projects to come in the future. Many countries have energy transition plans that have been announced. Thailand, for example, as part of its Thailand 4.0 vision, has identified energy transition as a key priority. Vietnam is the same. In Cambodia, for example, we did a very innovative solar parks project, which, as a result of the project structuring and bankability objective, that project resulted in the lowest negotiated tariff for any renewable energy project in the entire region, not just ASEAN region.